Um, We do have a quorum, and our agenda, we do have a public comment, and I have a card from Ralph Hoffman, of senior residing in Bart, 1655 North California Boulevard, Walnut Creek. Mr. Hoffman, welcome.
Thank you. Ralph Hoffman from Bart, proximate downtown Walnut Creek. And I've been advocating for seniors and disabled for quite a number of years, since I am one. I checked it, yeah.
Might need you to speak a little closer.
Oh, okay. How's that? Everybody hear me?
There we go.
Okay. And as a matter of fact, the summary of the authority board meeting of June 15th that you all have, it says there were 8 cities that have so far voted unanimously. I believe now there are an even dozen. And tonight there's a meeting in Brentwood, and no, I'm sorry, in San Pablo, and then there are 6 more, 3 in next Tuesday at Brentwood, Oakley, and San Ramon, and then 3 the following Tuesday in Clayton, Pinole, and Richmond. And I've attended the last 2, one in Pleasant Hill on Monday, and then one in downtown Walnut Creek on Tuesday. And I'm here today to urge you all to attend the last 6 or any of the public. I, of course, speak on senior mobility and also disabled mobility, but you all can speak about if you ride a bike, bike lanes or protected bikeways, whatever. But I would not suggest, if you go to any of these meetings, just to say you're in favor of this, because all of the meetings so far have been unanimously passed anyhow. Speak or email or mail a letter to these 6 remaining meetings and just advocate what you all would like to see changed in TEP. Actually, since TEP was first formulated, the Senior Mobility Action Council and others have sort of worked with 2CTA in various ways, and we have gotten more money allocated to seniors and disabled people than was in the original plan. So, coming to these meetings does help. And I guess you all know, I don't know if I have time remaining, but what the weather's been like this week. Monday was a spare the air day, and if you see the weather forecast for this weekend and into next weekend, though, that wind will stop, and now it's blowing the smog in. But by the weekend, I'm sure we'll have more spare the air days into next week. So spare the air and dump the pump. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. I don't have cards for anyone else. Is there anyone else in the area that would like to make public comment? Seeing none, I'll continue with the agenda. I'm going to add into our agenda an introduction. We will have a new member that will represent the city of Concord, and her name is Roseanne Niento. She's not here yet. We expect her this evening. Is that her looking around in the lobby? We were just introducing you. So feel free to come up and sit with our group. You're representing the city of Concord? We don't bite. Well, Mark does. Watch it, Mark. So we would like to welcome you to our committee. And once you catch your breath, at some point later on in the agenda, you might give us a little background on yourself. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm reminded as chair that when you make a motion, I need to indicate who made the motion, and I also need to indicate who seconded the motion. So please, no races. If anyone wants to make a motion, I need to know who you are, and then whoever is second, I'll need to second that, and then I will also need to restate the motion. I also am asking, as I reach for my cell phone, if you would please shut off your cell phones, just put them on vibrate or shut them off. There we go. And for our agenda this evening, we will be making 2 summary actions for approval, and then we will have a guest speaker, and then at the end we'll have reports. So we'll start out with reviewing our attendance log. Oh, excuse me, right. Summary of actions. I just said that, and then. So if you could review that, and could I have a motion for approval?
I'll move approval.
So Richard raised his hand for approval, and Stephen seconded it. So I have a motion to approve the summary of actions. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes. Thank you. General business. We look at your attendance log. And are there any revisions to the attendance log? And we're looking at the meeting calendar. And then if you would please look at your roster to ensure that your contact information is up to date. And hearing no revisions, we'll move on to our major discussion items. The first item on the agenda is to review the City of Brentwood's calendar years 2014-2015 Growth Management Program Compliance Checklist. And I understand we have their traffic engineer here. Thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. I usually sit up there as part of the traffic or the technical coordinating committee, and I can tell you we never get a spread like that. So consider yourselves lucky.
Somebody likes somebody.
Beg your pardon? They like you better than they like us, I guess. That's what happens when you have a meeting at 2 o'clock. Steve Kersavan, Engineering Manager for the City of Brentwood. I believe this is the 5th time I've been here. Hopefully I'm getting better at these things. Ultimately, you will be the decision maker on whether I am or I am not. I'll gladly answer any questions, or if you need some sort of a brief rundown of Brentwood, I'll gladly give it to you.
Steve, I'll just mention right off the bat that I know it isn't a good thing to observe, but it is comforting to those of us in places like Orinda and Moraga and Lafayette that Brentwood is having as much challenge meeting its housing element requirements as other communities in Contra Costa County.
I don't think you have to stop at Lafayette, Orinda, and Moraga.
Well,
you can
no,
probably
it's
list
pretty
all
much-
19 cities
yeah.
in the county. And
Yeah.
like I said, this is the 5th time I've been here. There's never been a traffic question, and that I guess that's good, but that's what I do for a living. And there's always housing questions, and I've never been able to get my housing person to come with me. But yes, it's true. We have the numbers. The state of California says we're doing what we're supposed to do. The reality is that it's a difficult challenge, and you can't always meet it. So at the end of the day, we look in the mirror and we say we've done the best we can, and the state of California says, you're approved. Thank you.
Steve, did the Grove at Brentwood come online during this reporting period? The Grove at Brentwood is an affordable housing project. We have at least 3 well-run affordable housing projects in the city.
The last affordable housing site to be finished was on Brentwood Boulevard.
Yeah, it's called the Grove.
Is that the one? Okay, that is complete, and that's been complete. In fact, I think you're right. It was completed during this phase, or these last 2 years. It is now complete, and if not 100% occupied, very, very close to 100% occupied.
Is that high density?
Yes.
And the next question would be, I think in 2013, the building codes changed to require either infrastructure of some sort or actual charging stations for electric vehicles be installed. Does that happen?
I can't answer if it happened at the Grove or not. I will tell you that at Brentwood City Hall, our new City Hall, we have 9 electric charging stations, and we do not charge for them. And I see the people come in the morning, park their car, get on their bike and go home, then pick it up in the afternoon. But hey, that's okay. If I had an electric car, I would do the same thing. I'm kind of a weird traffic engineer. I'd ride my bike to work and back every day. So.
I just have a question regarding this homeless shelter that's indicated in here. Is it currently being built? Has it been built? And my other question is there going to be any kind of an educational type of facility there, or is it just strictly to house them?
All we've done, as required, I believe, by either the county or the state, is we have determined a plot of land for which the emergency homeless shelter will be considered. It is not constructed, but we've gone through the steps to indicate where that plot of land is. So we've changed the zoning for that particular area.
And would it just be shelter once it is built, or would it include any kind of an educational facility for the homeless?
There will be, at that point in time, when a shelter is actually constructed.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Don't know when that'll be.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Do you have any idea how many homeless are in the area that could service?
There's nobody there today because it's 102. I don't know. There are. I don't know what the number is.
So I noticed in your inclusion here of low-income units in moderate housing areas, I'm looking specifically at attachment 1, page 5 of 8.
Okay.
And I see that it's ongoing. It's the third comment. Action H2A regarding affordable housing.
Okay. For 2015?
Yes. I'm just wondering how that's working. You're including 5 low-income units into the new subdivisions?
I don't know what actual subdivision that is, but we do have at the City of Brentwood an employee who is strictly housing, and that's all she does. So I see the number. I can't tell you where that is. I have a feeling that it's a cumulative number throughout the city. And I think if you look earlier in there, if you look on attachment 1, table A, you'll see the low income totaled 5. They're split through 3 subdivisions. So it's citywide, not subdivision.
I have another question, same page 5 of 8, that the city successfully amended the definition of family to what?
I have no idea.
I just found it curious. I read
I didn't
that
think
and
there were
said,
those many definitions.
related by blood, marriage, Adoption, yeah, okay, and then what? What is it now? All right. And I noted also that the city is educating the community about annual incomes for typical occupations. You're in cooperation with the Workforce Development Board there? Is that what you're
I'm
providing
not positive. I
seminars?
know our housing coordinator handles all that, so I would imagine that she is going after every possible piece of information she can get. That's what she does all day long.
Yeah, further down, there's a notation of preventing foreclosures. So was wondering if that's about educating the population there to bring them up to a certain level so that they are eligible for jobs once that area becomes even more attractive to commerce.
She does. She works with them, and I know it is, like I said, full-time housing coordinator. There are on our website, there are links to a number of different housing-related. There are first-time homebuyer deals for police officers, firemen, teachers.
I was curious as to, there was a reference to tourist revenue in Brentwood. What tourist attractions are out there? I remember going out there earlier. Yeah, fruit. That's something I thought, oh, that's cool. Are you guys marketing that even more?
I didn't know it either. I'm sending the housing person next time. I'm not coming back.
Send your
Exactly.
Send your housing
back.
person.
Bring her along.
Yeah. We'd love to see her. Okay. Other questions?
Ask me a traffic signal question or something.
Oh, I just have a nebulous question, but are you aware of the legislation that is in place in the building codes that requires new housing projects or new houses, new homes, to have electric infrastructure, i.e. an extra dryer outlet, as it were, for EVs, and for multifamily homes, like high density, there's requirements now for a certain number of charging stations per whatever the rule is for that, and of course any new commercial buildings as well.
Yes, and oddly enough, your timing is very good. Last week, city staff was invited to a grand opening of the newest subdivision by Pulte, and they have what they call their net zero option, which are solar powered, and even beyond that, when you go to this new subdivision, not one home has a lawn in the front. It's all low irrigation, drought tolerant, completely electronic version of their home. The only thing they didn't tell me was how much it cost. And I'm thinking I know why they did that. But yes, Pulte in Brentwood has been at the forefront of that. So we are aware of it, and we do push for it. And it has come. This is the Palmilla subdivision on Central Boulevard in Brentwood.
Well, I have just a comment in relation to all of that. And I had talked to an NRG EVgo representative and asked him why we didn't have more fast chargers out in Brentwood, Oakley, and out in this Far East area. And he said, because that's a start point for electric vehicles. So it's going to, until we get that new highway to Tracy, that's going to be a ways off. But having solar powered and electric vehicle charge stations for the multi-family and the new families is going to be important. It costs almost $1,000 to install one.
Yeah, and like I said, we have 9 at City Hall. One of the issues in Brentwood especially, and this is probably countywide, is on the commercial end of it, nobody's building new commercial buildings. Kohl's has put in an electric charging station, and there are a couple of others who have gone and retrofit their existing parking lots. But there are no new parking lots coming on board. So as the new ones start, And the reason for it mainly is there are so many storefronts that are vacant, there's no need to build new ones. So, but as they come, they'll be involved in that. We work with Contra Costa 511 very closely, and so they're with us as well.
I want one though.
I'll tell them.
I have a question. I'll give you a traffic question. You folks do sampling delay studies at the intersections for efficiency?
Absolutely.
Okay. I did those 40 years ago in San Francisco.
Well, I mean, there are a number of studies that occur in cities. Some are done by city staff. I'm the staff.
Okay.
I'm the entire traffic department. And I conduct more signal timing, accidents, traffic counts, residential areas, both. Developments, and that's what this is for,
Yeah.
are doing their studies by private consultants for mitigation measures, turning movement counts, and so on and so forth. City of Brentwood also just opened a traffic operations center in my office where we can watch 11 intersections throughout town. It's mainly the main intersection that leads to the high school, and we can watch it in modified timing, typically 8 to 8:30 and 2 to 3. So we're on top of that as well. The relationship between the traffic department and the police department is very, very good. Brentwood's roads have been ranked #1 for 6 years in a row. I think we might have slipped to #2. But if you guys give us more money, we'll go right back to #1.
Thank you.
That's compelling. That's compelling for us to do that. We'll do it. I have a question about traffic. You mentioned here that in attachment G, the Brentwood School. There's one, the preschool, and then you have an initial development, and then you have a future development site, and that the site connecting in is Jeffrey Way. Is that a route of regional significance?
No, Jeffrey Way is basically the off-ramp that leads from Highway 4 to Lone Tree Way. It was an existing road that has been modified to be an off and on-ramp owned by Caltrans.
So you will be putting together a traffic impact report on that at a later time?
We require the traffic impact report for any development that is going to generate 100 peak hour trips, which this one was.
And that is solely a preschool, or is that going to be a elementary school?
It was an existing church that has added a preschool to it. We have not heard that an elementary school will be coming. However, 2 blocks from this particular location, there is a public elementary school. So if they build one here, more than likely it would be more of a private elementary school. We have not heard that that is about to happen.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay.
Let me apologize for coming in a little late. The traffic coming from San Francisco to Walnut Creek is just a monster. Going in the morning, it's terrible. And try to use as much public transportation as possible, but when I have meetings all over the place, I have to have a vehicle. I just wanted to comment on Brentwood. I really like Brentwood. I like a lot of the things that I've had an opportunity to see. I've just met your mayor. Had a chance to sit down with the mayor and his wife for a few minutes. And I would love to see Brentwood and Antioch getting together with respect to traffic a lot more than they do. I don't know what that relationship is, but I see a lot of things that I like in Brentwood, and I'd like to see us working closer together because oftentimes many folks in Antioch, including myself, utilize Brentwood, and I'd like to see some of that money stay in Antioch. So
Lynn Filson and I speak on a regular basis. She's on my speed dial and I'm on hers. So we do talk on a regular basis.
Is there any interaction with respect to improving some of the highways?
There are, as an example, Hydron Ranch Road
Yes.
will be widened to a full 4-lane roadway. The city of Brentwood will bring Sand Creek Road, where it currently ends at Highway 4, to the city limit line. Antioch will continue it all the way out to Deer Valley. And that we do in cooperation with them, so that we don't have our road here and their road here. We have them together, so that we meet and discuss that on a regular basis.
And the road you're talking about is when Deer Valley goes up to Sand Creek, you make the left turn, off that turn?
Correct. You currently have a road that basically serves Kaiser.
Yes.
That one day will continue and become Sand Creek Road all the way into Brentwood. So Antioch builds their part, we'll build ours.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other comments or questions? No? Seeing none. So our tradition is that the city representative make the motion to move this document to the next step, which is the planning committee.
I move we recommend approval to the authority board for the City of Brentwood report.
Okay, thank you. And Mark has seconded the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So this carries, and so the next step is that the checklist will be discussed by the authorities planning committee, and their next meeting is scheduled for July 6th. And you've been to this rodeo a few times, you know the drill.
I'll be back.
Thank you. Thank you. Good luck. Next on the agenda is to review the Town of Moraga's calendar years 2014 and 2015 Growth Management Program Compliance Checklist, and their representative is here. Is that Holly? Welcome, Holly.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the committee. My name is Holly Pearson. I'm a planner with the Town of Moraga. And I'm fairly new with the town. I've been there about 6.5 months. I haven't been involved in the interjurisdictional transportation planning, and so I may not have the background or depth on all of your questions, but I did prepare the Measure J checklist. We have a fairly small staff at the town, so and I will do my best to answer any questions that you have. I'll just go over a few of the highlights in most of the areas related to compliance with the growth management program. We had just sort of routine actions and previous actions that have met the requirements, but I'll go over some highlights and changes and things that happened during 2014 and 2015. In terms of implementation of the La Miranda Action Plan, some highlights of Moraga's efforts in the calendar years 2014 and 2015 include the town participated with the cities of Lafayette and Orinda on the 2014 update of the La Miranda Action Plan. We worked with Contra Costa County and the cities of Orinda and Lafayette to complete the La Miranda Service Plan, which is a joint feasibility study to provide alternate transit service, such as a shuttle or circulator between the three cities and the BART stations, the Lafayette and Orinda BART stations. We received a Measure J Transportation for Livable Communities grant for the Livable Moraga Road project, and that is a long-term planning effort that is aimed at improving the function and the livability of one of the town's major corridors by recommending bicycle, pedestrian, and intersection improvements. And so we continue to make progress on that. It's a multi-year planning effort. And the town does expect to adopt the plan and final recommendations this year. Finally, we received a Transportation Development Act grant in 2014 for a comprehensive update of our pedestrian and bicycle master plan, which is was last updated in 2004. And we have been working on that for the past couple of years. We launched the planning process for that project in the spring of 2015. And the goal of the updated plan is to recommend a program of capital projects for pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, as well as supporting policies that will make it safer and more convenient to walk and bike in Moraga. In the area of development mitigation programs, we worked with Lafayette and Orinda and a consultant to complete a comprehensive update of the La Miranda Fee and Finance Authority traffic impact fee. That's our sub-regional traffic impact fee, and that was subsequently adopted by the Moraga Town Council earlier this year. And I finally wanted to talk a little bit about housing production and the delivering housing options. There are several things. First, in January 2015, we adopted a new housing element of our general plan for the planning cycle of 2015 to 2023, and it was certified by the state as compliant in February of 2015. In our new housing element, Moraga's regional housing needs allocation is 229 new housing units during that 7-year planning cycle. And of these, 74% are to be affordable to households earning below the area median income. And so a couple of the policies in our housing element, or the policies and also related implementation actions. First, we have vacant and underutilized land inventory of sites that would be appropriate for residential development. And secondly, we have identified sufficient land that has the zoning in place to provide for the development of a range of housing options, including single-family housing, multifamily, senior housing, workforce housing, and secondary units. In terms of new housing production during the calendar years 2014 and 2015, as you've seen in the attachments, there were only 2 new housing units constructed during these 2 years, meaning that the building permits were finalized, and that's a very low number, clearly. However, I just wanted to point out that over the next, in the coming years, there will be a lot more housing units constructed because we have over 200 units that have been approved. The entitlements are in place, and so that number will go up substantially in the next reporting cycle for the growth management checklist. In terms of efforts to promote affordable housing and a wider variety of housing types, one of the main things we're doing is we have a Moraga Center specific plan that was, it's not new for this reporting period. It was adopted in 2010. It allows for development of up to 630 new units in the town center, and I just have a diagram. This is centered around the existing Moraga Center shopping area and some surrounding vicinity. And I know you can't read it from here, but it's basically there's areas that are zoned for 10 to 12 dwelling units per acre, 20 dwelling units per acre, and the specific plan really emphasizes both senior housing and workforce housing. And so during the 2014 and 2015 calendar years, we've been working on implementation of this specific plan, including drafting new zoning, working with a consultant to draft new zoning that will implement these land use designations. So we have been working on that. We hope to adopt the new zoning in 2016, and that will help facilitate the production of more affordable housing units and denser housing as well. And then finally, there are several implementation programs in our new housing element that address incentives for below market rate housing or subsidized affordable housing. And these include the deferral of planning application fees until certificate of occupancy is issued, which helps save on the costs of the housing, the entitlement process and the overall production of housing. Also, waiver of some of the development impact fees for affordable housing projects, and town staff assisting developers of affordable housing in accessing state and federal subsidies and other forms of funding for affordable housing. So those are sort of the main highlights of our checklist, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
What questions and comments?
I'm curious, I just saw something here on your table 1, qualified or quantified housing goals and progress, and you listed Section 8 housing. And I'm wondering why, because that's not part of our affordable housing element.
Let's see, on the table.
Page 29 of 33 yeah. Yes.
This is for the 2015 housing element report.
January 1st, December 31st, 2014.
2014, okay. And I'm sorry, you're referring to the table? Oh, Section 8. And I'm sorry, can you repeat what the question was now that I've got it in front of me?
Well, I see Section 8, Table 1, and Section 8, is that referring to Section 8 housing?
I believe so. Again, I did not work on the housing element, and this was adopted, before I was on staff, and so I don't know all the background, but these would be the housing goals from our housing element, which the previous housing element prior to the one that was just adopted last year.
Yeah, when you start using Section 8 as part of the housing element, it creates a lot of headache and heartache, and they're not related.
Yeah, I see that in the 2015 housing report, that column is no longer there, so in our new housing element, apparently that's no longer part of the goals.
I've started to take a look at your complete streets policy, and I'm very impressed by it. Thank you for giving that to us. I always like to see cities that try to, where they really try to lean towards combining the residential and the commercial areas all in one place, and making sure that people that do not have cars can get to where they need to go, walking or bike or whatever. So that's great.
Thank you.
I have a comment. I note number one for your action plans, your first sentence is, there are no routes of regional significance in Moraga, yet your traffic flows into Orinda and heavily impacts Lafayette.
Right.
As a matter of fact, it's Moraga Road, St. Mary's Road, Glenside. I think that's it. There is no other way into Moraga. It's either through Moraga, it's either through Lafayette or Orinda, and possibly the back road through Canyon, but I doubt people will make that part of their commute. And so that being the case, I'm wondering what plans do you have in place for public transportation? Buses to Bart, buses within Moraga, because that traffic, I'm in that traffic in the morning, that is, you don't move.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've seen
I'm
it.
just really curious. And seeing that there's major housing now on the ridge, that road between Ream and going to St. Mary's Road, there are houses that are going to be built there, and you've got a few what I call baby mausoleums off Moraga Way, next to the gas station across from the country club. Those homes are huge. I don't know, 6,000-7,000 square feet at least, being constructed now, in addition to the ones that are being constructed at the ridge, in addition to the ones in the downtown area of Moraga, in addition to the ones that are next to the fire station. So you've got significant housing growth. I'm just curious as how that's going to be impacting the traffic already that is clogged into Orinda and Lafayette.
Okay, good question. What I can tell you is, as I mentioned, the town of Moraga has worked with Lafayette and Orinda on the study regarding transit service to the BART stations, because most of the traffic you're referring to is commute traffic. So if people had a viable alternative to get to the BART stations, they'd be a lot more likely to take public transportation rather than having to drive to their jobs. I am not familiar with the specific recommendations or what the next steps are with that study, and I apologize for that. So I can get back to you with more information if you'd like. But
Thank you. I would. Thank you.
Under housing and job opportunities, it's checked yes. And maybe I overlooked it, but I was trying to find out, since you did such a great job with the affordable housing, what kind of employment opportunities would be put in place to kind of support that?
Employment opportunities. I would say the main effort and the main potential for employment opportunities in the town also comes from the adoption of the Moraga Center specific plan, where in addition to areas slated for residential development, there are areas for mixed office residential. So, again, we are putting the zoning in place to allow new office development. We don't know what kind of what kind of proposals we might get, but there will be the intent is to create more of a town center. Right now, it's just retail. It's a shopping center with a lot of underutilized land, but the town would like to attract and incentivize some new commercial development that would provide employment.
I guess I was thinking, like, when you say, for example, you talked about the Section 8 house, and that's no longer in the plan, I guess, but, when you have set aside affordable housing, oftentimes it's folks that apply for that house, and they don't, especially in that particular area, they don't make the type of money that would support being able to maintain that household.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking, like, for example, in San Francisco, one of the things that I did on the Housing Authority Commission, or we did as a group, when we redid public housing, we put in there that 40% of those jobs should go to residents. And I was thinking of some kind of plan like that. So what I'm asking, is there a specific plan? Obviously there's not, but there are conversations going on.
Specifically aimed at connecting jobs, any employment opportunities created in Moraga to residents of Moraga?
Yes.
There are no specific plans in that I know of related to that, no.
So when you checked yes under housing options and job opportunities, I guess you were talking basically about, like you said, the new construction for new business, which is what you kind of just said.
Which point specifically on the checklist are you referring to? I'm sorry.
Under compliance checklist, housing options and job opportunities, yes. But I couldn't find anything that kind of really explained it to me.
Well, there's 3 sub-points under that. So I'm just trying to clarify exactly which point you're asking about.
That's what I'm saying. They don't address it. The job opportunities, they address the housing options quite well.
Right.
But I think you answered my question. You said that the new office spaces, so it wasn't quite what I was looking for, but you did answer my question.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed that, but looking at what those 3 sub-points under that are, they are more oriented towards housing options rather than job opportunities, so I'm not sure.
Well, that's extremely important, but,
yeah.
Once I read that, I'm looking at, especially when part of it talked about Section 8, how would they maintain, it's a good plan for getting them in there, but how do you keep them in there?
Sure.
And, having been a housing authority commissioner, I know the problems that come along with Section 8 tenants, particularly if they haven't been, really checked out real well. I mean, you have some very, very good tenants, but you have to have people that are capable of matching tenants with areas. I've seen some terrible mistakes made. I don't want to use examples, but just some terrible mistakes made where some really beautifully developed properties were kind of brought down because adequate ancillary services weren't put in place before trying to do something to help, and often that's the case. We do wonderful work, but we don't have the services in place to assist people that haven't had those opportunities before, But I thank you very much for responding.
Thank you. One thing I would say also in response to that is that housing options for households below the area median income, because as I'm sure you all know, the AMI for the area, including Moraga, is fairly high. People or households at low or very low income levels would still be earning, they wouldn't be minimum wage, type of incomes. It would be higher. What's considered in this case lower income is not really low income by what you would think of that as a common definition.
So what is, do you know what your expected growth rate is for over the next 10 to 20 years? And dovetailing off of that, you mentioned workforce housing, and I was curious as to what that meant.
Mm-hmm. Well, the growth rate, there hasn't been a lot of growth, population increase or development in Moraga in recent years. And in terms of expected growth, I mean, I guess it depends on what metric or what definition you're using. I did mention the ABAG, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. So that's in terms of regional planning, and which derives from the state law. It's Moraga's share of accommodating the regional growth is 229 housing units. And I don't know the number of housing units in Moraga, but the population is about 16,000. So that's a pretty modest amount of growth. And I'm sorry, the second part of your question.
Yeah, I was curious as to what you meant by workforce
housing, yes. In the Moraga Center specific plan, workforce housing is defined as housing that's affordable to the local workforce and lower earning occupations, and it gives some examples which include firefighters, teachers, retail and service workers.
Firefighters?
Yeah. Those are the definitions in the Moraga Center specific plan, but it's really meant to include just sort of middle income, middle earning occupations.
So Holly, my concern with, I'll speak for the city of Lafayette, is that in an emergency, if we're looking at a significant growth in Moraga, that's going to impact that La Miranda area significantly. There's no way out. There's no way in. Mm-hmm. And so for safety of the residents who live there, I would urge you when you return to look at that. We're looking at that in the city of Lafayette. We're telling ABAG, no. Enough. Enough with the infill, enough with the proposed increase in population. The fact of the matter, most people can't afford to live in that area. And for us to make reports that state that we have affordable housing, we don't have affordable housing. It's just, that's just the way it is. And the dangerous part, it's really the safety part of it. Mm-hmm. Your area depends solely on getting in and out of Lafayette and or getting in and out of Orinda. And if we continue to clog those ways, we're looking for a disaster. Mm-hmm. I would urge you, when I speak with CCTA, with the bus system, if they are proposing a bus service that provides scheduled service for commuters in the morning, that they adhere to that, and that they make that schedule one that is that fits into the commuters and the high school kids. Probably get more high school kids than you will professionals, but to fit into rather than that bus coming at 9 o'clock in the morning, everybody's gone, and then coming every hour on the hour. That's not going to work. Mm-hmm. People are not going to take the buses. And I believe that La Miranda, that area, is prime for public transportation. The St. Mary's bus route works really well. And
I've taken it myself. Yeah,
me too. And you knew when that bus was coming, and that bus comes every 15 minutes, and you could go to the library, class, and you knew you would get out of Moraga and either go to Orinda BART or Lafayette BART. And the same thing to be able to go into downtown Moraga and or Lafayette or Orinda and then come back home. So I was reviewing your checklist and just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, your point is well taken. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can you clarify what you mean by safety? I'm not sure what you're talking about. Like fire safety?
Yes. Fire safety.
Evacuation routes.
Correct.
Is what you're talking about. Okay.
Correct. Because one of the things that I first read there are no routes of significance in Moraga. They all lead predominantly into Lafayette, and then you have that one route into Orinda. And you have the other route through Canyon, but...
I will observe that I've lived in Moraga only a year and a half, having lived in Orinda prior to that for 20 years, and I'm very surprised at how many people actually do go out and go over Canyon. So obviously the dominant routes out are Moraga Road and Moraga Way, but people do go out that way.
Great place to go if you're going to Oakland Airport and trying to avoid traffic. Other comments or questions? Okay, so again, as is our tradition, the representative for the city of Moraga, town of Moraga, which is Dennis, if you would then make the motion.
Move approval.
Thank you. And a second? So I think Mike, I heard second, so I've got a motion to approve and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So that's been moved, and that will then move on to the city planning, the Transportation Authority planning. And again, that's scheduled for July 6th, and you'll receive more questions from that group too. And then at that point, that would be approved for the monies to be distributed to the town of Moraga for the calendar year 2014 and 2015.
Thank you very much. And I will prepare some information on the transit service planning.
I appreciate that.
That will go along with housing growth for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good luck. Thanks.
I have a general comment. I charge my car almost every day, every other day at around noontime at Lafayette Whole Foods. And on Wednesdays, I have coffee with an old buddy, and I just watch the massive mess that is that entire area around Whole Foods. It's a horrid mess. It's jam-packed full. It takes forever to get in and get out. And there are people, I'm surprised that they don't have more accidents there, but it's horrid. And I cannot see how they can continue on in that fashion.
Okay, so once again, before we have our guest speaker, I would like to mention that we have a representative for the city of Concord, and she is present, and excuse me, and her name is Roseanne Nieto. And so, and you are, your term is through February of 2018. So if you wouldn't mind giving us just a little bit of background on you, please.
Well, I've been involved with the city for about 10 years on the Naval Weapons Station, and that's going to be a nightmare for transportation. And we're already aware of it. I met with Ray in the planning department before I came over here. He identified 4 projects that he's looking to ask for funding for, and all of them lead to Antioch and Pittsburgh. So we know that we are a hub for future transportation problems, and that we feel that the importance of Concord's place in the Contra Costa community in letting the traffic flow out to those areas is very, very important. And we hope that we will be able to, that I will be able to explain well what we are looking for and look for your approval for these certain projects that are identified that are going to be, well, next year we're hoping to have the developer dig a hole in the ground somewhere, not the end of next year. So if that happens, we're really going to be in trouble. So. And it was a natural move for me to become involved in this because of my work experience. I was an asset manager for the federal government and for General Services Administration. I've worked with traffic reports, planning commissions, all kinds of things in the San Diego area, which was my territory. But I've been retired from 10 years from that. My biggest accomplishment in that time was I was the asset manager for the new San Diego Federal Courthouse. And my name is on that building, which is, I can kind of take my grandchildren one day down there to see that. But I have looked forward to this assignment because every time we started talking about Willow Pass Road and Highway 4 and Kirker Pass, we all kind of shuddered because we know that they are greatly impact. And if we don't spend money in Concord, why spend money in those other communities out there? We've got to do this as a process for us to maintain Highway 24 and 680 as really true transit areas. And when they come to Concord and you hit the town, it can be a real disaster without help. So if you have any questions regarding what I've done or talking to me, I've been a resident of Concord for 52 years. I have 2 darling children and 8 exquisite grandchildren.
Thank you. So next on the agenda is our presenter, Mike Healy. I'd like to give you a little background on him. Mike Healy started at Bart November 15th, 1971. He actually announced his retirement in 2004. At that time, he was managing a contract for Measure A and was asked to stay on board, and so he stayed and retired December 2005. That entire time, Mike was Department Manager of Media and Public Affairs and the voice for Bart. So many people remember him on the radio and on television throughout many, many different news-breaking stories. I'm very happy to have worked with Mike at Bart, and I know he's got some interesting stories that he can tell us about, and other stories he's got to swear us to secrecy. Mike is currently back at Bart and consulting. He does come back periodically and consults with the various general managers who call him in, ask him for his advice, and certainly for the knowledge that he has in the history of the district. So what you have in front of you is a pamphlet that I bought you from Bart. It's Bart History in the Making, so that will be a take-home for you. And also a little packet there where you can put either your BART ticket or your whatever. And Mike, you're on.
Thank you, Jolie. Well, first of all, I'd like to say it's nice to see Dennis Fay. I haven't seen Dennis for a while. One of our partners over the years in funding and what have you. I wasn't sure how much you wanted to know about the history of Bart when Jolie first invited me to come and present something to you. This brochure, by the way, I actually wrote this brochure myself. I just noticed it about 15 years ago. Now, I will tell you a secret to start off with. I have written the history of Bart. I started it 3 years ago. I finished it last year, and it's going to be published, and it will be out in the fall. I think sometime around November of this year. I like to think of BART as sort of the miracle transportation system that almost wasn't, because it came within a gnat's eye of not happening, right here in Contra Costa County, of all places. But let me go back a ways. How many of you know, well, of course, if you read this brochure, you're going to know a lot. The genesis of BART was an Army-Navy report back in 1947 that was issued in the post-war years to develop some interest in the possibility of a tube that could carry trains between San Francisco and the East Bay. Now, the Navy and the Army were interested in this because they were concerned during the Second World War that if anything happened to the bridge, they needed another avenue or another corridor in order to move troops or military personnel. The project actually started before the war and was put aside during the war years and then was brought back again after the war. One interesting thing that I found in my own research was that when it came time to build a Transbay tube, Congress actually had to approve it because it was under Navy jurisdiction, and President Eisenhower actually had to sign the bill in order to make the Transbay tube possible. Just one of those little anecdotes. Anyway, a San Francisco supervisor named Marvin Lewis took the report and really ran with it. And he developed a committee of citizens and people from San Francisco to begin to push the idea of not only building this tube, but also a new regional rapid transit system. Now, at the time, the key system in Oakland was still operating, but it was going downhill, and a company called National City Lines, I don't know, anybody familiar with this story? National City Lines was a company that was designed to buy up rail transit across the country, including Los Angeles and the Bay Area, and basically turn it into a bus system. It turned out this was a front company for Standard Oil, General Motors, and Firestone Tires. And it turned out to be an antitrust issue for the federal government. They were tried as a consortium, and they were fined $5,000 after making billions. Another little story. But they did dismantle the key system in 1957, and that was about the time after several studies came about that BART was created by the state legislature under the Public Utilities Code, and the enabling legislation basically created the BART district. Originally it was 6 counties, and at that time Santa Clara County decided they wanted to bow out before it even got to that point. So the legislature changed it to 5 counties: Alameda, Contra Costa, San Francisco, San Mateo, and Marin. So that was basically the district that was going to be administering the building of this new transit system. Excuse me. As you probably know, when it came time for a referendum to pay for the BART system in 1962, San Mateo County dropped out, and Marin was asked to drop out by BART after the Golden Gate Bridge said that you could not run trains across the second deck of the bridge. There were 2 studies done. The Bechtel Corporation did a study, and they said, yes, you could run trains. And the Bridge District, then under the Redwood Empire, said, no, you can't, and therefore forget that. That meant that if BART were to go to Marin, there would have to be another tube at an enormous cost, and it would have to have been borne by Marin County taxpayers. There's very little industrial tax base coming out of Marin. Mostly it's a bedroom community at the time, and still is to a great degree. And so it would have been borne on an ad valorem tax by the homeowners. In the meantime, there were environmentalists up there saying, don't bring BART, it's going to bring growth, bring crime. So BART went to the county and basically asked them to drop out. And they did, albeit reluctantly. And then later, when they were getting very close to the referendum, Marin County approached BART and asked if they could come back into the district. And BART refused. BART rejected the idea. So it came down to 3 counties. In the roughly around the spring or early summer of 1962, Alameda County and Alameda County and San Francisco counties approved putting BART on the ballot. Contra Costa did not. It was still being debated in the Board of Supervisors. There were 2 votes for putting BART on the ballot and 2 votes against, and one nobody knew what he was going to do, and that was a guy named Joe Silva. The president of the BART board at the time was a guy named Adrian Falk, and he and the mayor of Oakland at the time, John Houlihan, and the mayor of San Francisco, George Christopher, all went out. Well, they first of all, they called Joe and they said, we got to meet with you. This was the day of the vote. And he said, well, I really don't want to meet with you. I can't meet with you. And they said, come on, you got to meet with us. At least hear us out. So he said, okay, I'll tell you what. You want to come out to Martinez Coffee Shop at 6 in the morning? I'll meet you there. So they traipsed out there. And as the mythology on this meeting goes, after they had badgered him for about an hour to vote in favor of the BART project, to put it on the ballot, the phone rang on the wall, and somebody in the coffee shop answered it and said, hey, Joe, it's for you. And he went over, and it was Pat Brown telling Joe that it was really important for him to vote on this project. After the meeting, they had no idea what Joe was going to do. He was noncommittal. And John Houlihan was actually angry and said, let's get out of here, guys. This guy's not going to do it. We're sunk. When the vote came, his was the swing vote to put BART on the ballot. Had he not done that, I don't think there'd be a BART today, because the rights of way were already being, designed by Caltrans, Caltrans. Today it's Caltrans. It was called the California Department of Transportation, I think then. Anyway, they were already designing the freeways, 24, 880, and various potential medians for BART that BART could go into if the timing was right. So then the question was, would there be enough votes to carry the day? The requirement at the time was 66% of a positive vote. And so Bill Stokes, who was then the assistant general manager, he'd started off as a public information officer and then rose to be the assistant general manager, and a guy named Frank Chambers, who was later became a lobbyist for BART, went to Sacramento, and they got the legislature to change the percentage requirement to 60%. And the reason for this was because all the polls showed it wouldn't pass if it were 66%. On the day of the vote, and this is another little story that Bill Stokes told me when I interviewed him. Bill Stokes and a guy named John Everson, who was going to be the project manager, were waiting for the votes to come in his office in the Flood Building in San Francisco on the 4th floor. That was Bill's office. At about midnight, they still didn't have anything from the votes. Finally, at around 1 o'clock, Jack Everson put his head down on the table and basically went to sleep. Bill Stokes continued to nervously pace back and forth, smoking his traditional pipe. And finally, at 3 in the morning, the registrar of voters called him and said, "The votes are in." Alameda is solid. San Francisco is solid. Contra Costa was below what was needed. However, there was one other thing they did. They averaged it out between the three counties, and they had 61.2%. Just a squeaker to get the referendum, or to approve the referendum. Bill Stokes, and this is what Bill told me, Bill Stokes went over and he shook Jack Everson. He said, Jack, the vote's in. And Jack looked at him and said, what? Yeah, he said, the vote's in, we're in. And Jack Everson looked at him and he said, you mean we actually have to build the damn thing? True story. Anyway, I thought maybe, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I was going to be brief, but if you have any questions, you know, there's a lot going on with BART all the time. I will say this. When BART first opened in September 11th, 1972, in the first week they carried 100,000 people, and that was on the Fremont line from Fremont up to the MacArthur Station. Today they carry about 450,000 a day, and trips a day, and it's growing. And I calculated that, well, actually I had some help from one of the BART planners, but since BART opened, they have carried 1 billion people, about 40 billion passenger miles. And all those passengers would have been on the road somewhere had BART not existed. Anyway, do you have any questions?
I'm curious about the E-BART out in East Bay and how that transpired. I hear all kinds of horror stories, and I was just curious why we get a diesel engine as opposed to the traditional.
Partly funding, I think. That was the main thing. It's cheaper, and it's going to look a little like BART, but it'll be a diesel operation. And probably 2 cars, maybe married pairs or something like that. Will connect, I think, with either the North Concord or the Concord Station. I'm not sure which. It'll go out to Pittsburgh, or out to Antioch, I think, and I think ultimately Brentwood, I believe.
Yeah.
I think that's the idea.
But it looks like it's going to connect at Pittsburgh Bay Point.
Yeah, there's a separate
Is it Pittsburgh Bay Point?
platform
Yeah.
beyond the Pittsburgh
Is it?
Bay Point
Yeah.
station.
Anything else?
What's the possibility of having you come to one of our council meetings and tell the same story to some of the folks in Antioch?
Wow.
Because I'm sure they would love to hear it. I guess I'm fascinated by it for 2 reasons. The politics of it, and I've worked for 3 railroads, so it's amazing. And I think I was surprised that you didn't talk about the safety record, but I think as railroads go, it's probably one of the safest railroads in history. And I also look at how many other entities have utilized the same type of system, and I'm speaking of the people mover out at San Francisco International. And I think that's a direct correlation of what you guys did.
Well, BART was really a renaissance system in a way. It was the first all new system to be built in this country in over 60 years, and the first west of the Mississippi. The Washington Metro was modeled on BART, and so was the MARTA system in Atlanta, very much modeled on BART as well. And in fact, they used some of the same suppliers in terms of the cars, and also the Westinghouse control system. So BART brought a lot to the industry in that respect. In terms of safety, yes, you're absolutely right. BART has one of the best safety records, and probably among the best anywhere. There's no question about that. I had a lot of fun at BART during my years there. And as a matter of fact, I don't think I ever had a dull day, now that I think about it. I had to manage a department. I had 14 people in my department. I had marketing and customer service as well as public information. But the most visible part of the job was for me as a spokesperson in the public information portion of the district. I used to have people coming to me all the time and asking me to arrange this or that. I remember one time a couple came to me and asked me if I could arrange for a marriage on a BART train. This was fairly early in the system's operating history. And so we decided that, sure, they could get married. I thought it would be kind of fun, invite the press. And so they had some judge, I think, from Oakland to marry them, and they married on the train, I think, from 12th Street. The ceremony took place from 12th Street to MacArthur. Very quick ceremony. And then they went off to Vegas for their honeymoon. Well, I'm getting to that. Herb Cain, and I think it was in Tuesday's paper, had an item in his column recounting the marriage, the fact they got married on a BART train, and then they were divorced on Monday, or they split on Monday. And then, of course, he blamed BART for that. So we had those kinds of things all the time that happened at BART. But it was a great job, and it's a great system, and I was very proud to work for it all those years. So.
Excuse me? I worked for the city of San Francisco, and another guy and I did all the traffic routing on Mission Street and Market Street to accommodate the construction.
That must have been a nightmare.
That was a fun job. The gargoyles on the hotel in San Francisco, the gargoyles that hang out over Market Street at 2nd. I hung on one of the gargoyles and took pictures looking down into the Montgomery Street station.
You probably hexed them.
But that was an interesting project.
Well, they had to, in the mission area, when they were digging 70, 80 feet, I think, below the surface, they had to have high pressure in there to make sure that there weren't any cave-ins. And also they had the shield. They had the bore and the shield. But they also had to have decompression. And they had a decompression tank, and they could be down there 4 hours, and then they had to go into decompression after they were finished with their shift.
And we ran all the utilities on the sidewalk, put a box around the water lines, sewer lines, electric, TV, and all that stuff.
Well, the utility relocation was another nightmare. I know in my history, in my story, I go back to the late 1800s in New York and what they had to go through to build that system. But then a lot of the things they developed for building that subway, the New York City subway, beginning in the late 1800s, was used 50, 60 years later to build BART and other systems too. So, anything else?
Yeah, without telling my age, I was born and raised in Chicago, so
oh yeah,
I'm old enough to have
the loop.
I'm old enough to have ridden what we call the old train, which was the Howard Street Chicago Transportation Authority train, and young enough to see the new train in Chicago. The old train was a train that ran on top of the ground, but it went underground. The new train was a much more modern train that ran only on top of the ground. And I remember when I moved to San Francisco right out of the Army in 1979 and rode BART for the very first time, it was like, I felt like I was starting my own legacy. I was away from what my father had taught me. But it was like time travel almost. It was unbelievable. And having worked for Southern Pacific Railroad, right at One Market, I remember when Southern Pacific Railroad, a lot of folks don't know that Southern Pacific Railroad is where Sprint Telephone came from. Sprint is Southern Pacific Railroad International Telephone Line. And, just hearing your story is quite refreshing for me. So I just wanted to say personally, thank you.
Well, glad you enjoyed it.
Mike, thanks for coming. Looking to the future, I have a question. Do you know when the new cars are going to be coming online?
I actually was going to show you something with my computer, but crashed, or I had a 3-minute thing on the new cars, and they have one now at Hayward, which arrived 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I had some film on it that I was going to show you. But it disappeared. I don't know what happened to it. I'm sure I'll find it somewhere in there. But I understand that the prototypes will all be in by the end of this year, and the production cars will start coming in 2017 at some point. They had some problems, but they always do, with new cars like that. The interesting thing about the cars is that there are very few manufacturers left in the world today who actually manufacture transit cars. There are none in the U.S. Bombardier is manufacturing these cars. They're coming out of upstate New York, and then they're trucking them across country. Why, I don't know. I don't know why they don't put them on a train, but they're trucking them across country to the Hayward Yard, where they get then basically unwrapped, and they start checking them out. So, but that's the answer, Dennis. They'll be, I think, 2017 for the production cars.
I'm just wondering where in the process, how early in the process was the decision made to make the cars so that they could be used on normal railroads? They were too wide. That's A, and B, that they were not to use tires, like a lot of the other systems in the world right now.
Well, there are a couple of answers. On the wide gauge track, which is standard is 4.8 and a half, and Bart's track is 5.6. The reason for that was because they were going to be aluminum cars, lightweight cars, in order to be efficient in terms of power utilization or power consumption. So you could reduce the power consumption if you could reduce the weight of the cars. And that was one factor. And then the other was stability. If the trains were going to go across the Golden Gate Bridge, second deck, which of course they never did, there would be high wind factors that they would have to deal with. And so the wide tracks gave the cars more stability. The cars are wider than normal transit cars. We used to say they were almost as wide as a jet. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what we used to say. But that's the reason for the wide tracks. And what was the other part of your question? It was
the wheels.
Oh,
they were the railroad wheels, which still make noise, versus tires.
The reason for that was traction. Because some of the grades are 4%, the rubber tires you couldn't give them couldn't give the traction that steel wheels on steel rail could. That was the reason for that. They actually went to Toronto, checked out, that's basically the French cars have the rubber wheels, and they make a lot of noise. When you see when those tires are going around a curve, you can hear them even more than the steel wheels. But the real reason was the 4% grade. Anything else?
So, Mike, I want to thank you so much for coming and being part of our group and giving us a background on the history of Bart. I personally enjoyed every minute working with you. There was, in fact, never a dull moment. I believe you have worked with 8 general managers, is that correct?
I stopped counting, but yeah, it's probably pretty close.
Yeah. And Bill Stokes being one of our most visible and well-known general managers. And certainly your tenure at the district, I personally will attest to the fact that was, especially being spokesperson for the district, under some very tight and very difficult situations, none of them labor disputes, political issues. Our board of directors are elected, so they're politicians. And you always were grace under fire.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure being here. I did not answer your question about Antioch. I think I could do that at some point. You can find out from Jolie how to get a hold of me. I was just thinking, okay. Yeah, I could do it. Talk to the city council. What do you think they'd want to ask me? I may need it.
I just think it's a good idea that folks know the history of Bart. I've had quite a few associates that work for Bart. The person I was close to was Lynette Sweet. And Lynette just bragged about her tenure at Bart all the time. I mean, she felt about Bart like I feel about sitting with these guys. I learned so much more about the entire East Bay, being a former commissioner in San Francisco and never really having a reason to spend a lot of time with you. So every one of these meetings I come to, I learn something new. And, my involvement with trains, Bart is certainly right at the top of my list. Through my own, having worked as a switchman, as, a crew caller, and to labor as well.
Well, one final word. You're all aware that Bart will have a bond issue on the November ballot. Very important. To rehabilitate much of the system is going to be a very important ballot measure. So thought I'd throw that out there while I could. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mike.
It's good to hear your voice.
So next on our agenda are reports, and we do have a report from our former chair, Steve. So did you want to give that?
Yes, if you don't have one in front of you, there's extra copies up at the front table. I'm not going to go through it in detail. I'm certainly available to answer questions. It was kind of a relief to have a relatively ordinary authority board meeting. The agenda was even a little light. The last several before this have been very intense trying to work out the transportation expenditure plan. We are now in the part of the process where the TEP is before the County Board of Supervisors and the various councils. And it will come back next month for the final decision whether to put the sales tax extension out on the ballot for November. So that will be an important meeting. I don't know if our minutes are going to change all that much. One of the things, they're going to change the nature of the minutes of all of the authority meetings. I imagine ours will be just a little more summary of actions taken. Anyway, if you want more of the background on that, it's in the agenda packet for the authority board meeting. The award to Executive Director Iwasaki is rather a distinguished award in the transportation area. So he received that, and having listened and read his executive director's presentations of the past few years, he does an incredible amount, not only on the local stage, but the national and international stage. This being the last board meeting before the start of the new fiscal year, one of the important things was ratifying the various percentages of the programs as part of the consent calendar. And I also just want to point out, a firm date hasn't been picked yet. Partly it's trying to clear availability of enough electeds to be able to make it, so you're kind of working with when Congress will be in recess, when the legislature will be in recess, and et cetera, et cetera. But we're talking now, targeting sometime in late July for the ribbon cutting on the entire Highway 4 East widening project. And it has made a tremendous difference. Almost all the lanes are in operation. Often the inner lane is shut down so that they can get access with equipment to the track laying project. But there is just one little segment between A Street and Hillcrest that still needs to be cleaned up, but it has just made a tremendous difference out in that area.
Reduced my commute by 20 minutes.
And those of us who are, interested further out, it's not in my official report, but I talked to Randy, and I think he has authority to complete one negotiation with probably Kinder Morgan or the city of Brentwood, I'm not sure which, and then it'll be ready to go out to bid on the Balfour Road interchange project. So it'll actually be a freeway class access right into the heart of Brentwood, all the way from Concord into the heart of Brentwood.
Thank you. Any reports from CAC members? So I received an email congratulating me as a chair for the committee from Executive Director Iwasaki, and his comment to me was he wanted to know what the vision and the expectations were for our committee for this coming year. And okay, so I would like to put it out there to you to think about that and come back next time and let us know what your expectations and your visions are for this committee. I'll tell you, and in thinking about it, what I'd like to make sure that continues to happen. You folks are very good at this already. I do expect that all of us read the checklists, and that if there are any questions that you may want to mark up your packet, I don't expect you to read it fine-tuned like I do. I read everything. And so, but if you've got questions, I hope, and I don't suspect that this isn't happening. I hope you don't feel that your question is either, if I ask this question, how am I going to sound? So please feel free to ask those questions. I do continue to expect that we suggest speakers that we feel would be interesting to the group in transportation and planning and housing. I do expect that we continue to be present, and by that I mean that we're here, that we're paying attention, and that we're engaged. So please attend any meetings that you feel in your particular city is of interest, and feel free to report back. I think that would be very important for all of us. And in your readings in the newspaper or magazines, if you've come across anything that you feel would be of interest to our group, bring copies. We'd love to see them. So those are my expectations. That's my vision for this committee. Also, my vision is that we remain a committee. Please, God. I think that would be a good thing. So, other comments?
Madam Chair, I'd like to take a moment to mention that one of our former members, Charles Hogel, passed. I saw the obituary in the paper just a few days ago, less than a week ago, I think. And they made note in the obituary about his service on this committee. He was very proud of having a chance to serve. I believe he was 96 when he passed, and I don't know if anyone on the present committee remembers him, but I've been around long enough to have known him. So I just wanted to make note of that for the committee tonight. You know, I think it was either Orinda or Moraga, but I can't recall. If you go into the obituary section on the Contra Costa Times, you'll probably find that, and it will tell you.
Madam Chair, since there's been a little bit of discussion of the Executive Director, Randy Iwasaki, I wanted to just relate something that probably not a lot of people know, and that he is very active in helping young engineers. He was a graduate of Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. He's very active down there. And I have my own personal experience with him helping my son, who just got a degree in transportation engineering. So he really enjoys doing that, and that's probably not something everybody knows about Randy.
And thank you for saying that. I managed the summer engineering internship program for Bart, and so I will then coordinate with him for next year's interns. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just a point of clarification. When I spoke with the young lady that did the presentation for Concord, I believe it was, and I talked about housing options and the job opportunities. Moraga, okay. Well, she mentioned, okay, you're from Concord, sorry. Anyway, the young lady from Moraga, and I should have realized that it was Moraga when she brought up the point that the housing that they would be developed, that it wouldn't be, someone that would be in dire need of some assistance. Yet, there was no plan for job opportunities, and the box was checked. And I could have went on. I had questions that I thought could be, that needed to be answered for my satisfaction, because I do represent a segment of the population that's kind of underserved, as well as the entire city of Antioch, with problems that are developing, and particularly when you start talking about Section 8, where you write things and then they're no longer part of the plan. It's misinformation. But I did not think that this was the appropriate forum to address those kind of issues. But I wanted to say this and have it formally put on the record, because I didn't want to come across like I hadn't read her information, or I was satisfied with what I got. I just don't think that a transportation meeting, a meeting that's basically about transportation, I don't want to push over into other avenues. That's something I would do off the record. But generally, when a statement like that is made, I get to the bottom of it. But I didn't think I needed to put her on the spot.
I don't believe, and Matthew can probably address this, but I don't believe that the people who come here and present their checklists feel that they're being put on the spot. I hope not. And even if they're freshmen to the process, I believe that prior to coming here, they are at least prepped by a senior member of their particular staff. So certainly Steve, who is seasoned, it was a lot more relaxed, and I don't feel, and if she was feeling that she was put on the spot, I'm sure Matthew will hear of it, and Martin will hear of it, and then I will hear of it. And then you'll hear it.
Well, no.
But I don't know, Matthew, do you want to address that?
I would say your statement is correct. You know, they come here for a purpose, and that is to, you know, present their checklist. They you know, they aren't directly involved in every item there on the checklist. So, you know, some things she was more familiar with, some things she's not. I will check in with her and make sure she, you know, had a good experience here. But I think, you know, we prepped her, the previous planner, who's now her supervisor, prepped her. So I think she was fine. And, you know, I also told her if there's any questions she was unfamiliar with, we could always follow back up, like we did last month with the county, where they followed up with some questions that they weren't able to answer on the spot. So I think we prep them. They're not always ready for every question, but they know what's expected of them when they come here. So
Thank you. And to address something else, there are items on the checklist, as Millard pointed to, and I'll look at that and say, this doesn't make any sense to me at all. Page 2 says this, page 19 says this. Which is it? And I think that it's appropriate for us to mention it, not only just the transportation, but the housing element. It's on here, so might as well make comments to it. They bring this back to their particular supervisor and their particular group, and that's what we're here for.
yeah, and I just wanted to note that this is my first year kind of being staff on this committee, and the more I look at the checklist and see them presented in front of you, the more I say, okay, here's things we're going to fix next time, because that item that talks about housing and job opportunities, that's in the title, but when you look at what they're asked to provide as part of the checklist, they're only asked to provide housing data and not job data. So it's a bit of a misnomer, and that's something I think we'll address on the next cycle, is either changing that title and removing jobs from it if that's not actually what we're trying to get at, or we will ask them to provide backup materials for what they're doing and for job production.
Yeah, because you automatically have statistics. I mean, if you're building houses, you have to hire a laborer, you have to hire a carpenter, and then after it's built, there are certain jobs, management positions, secretary positions. I mean, there are positions that can be reported, and from that you can break out all kind of statistics. So, I mean, if it's on the chart and we're supposed to sit here and look at this chart, then, you know, I'm one of those people that would ask a question. And I knew she wasn't put on the spot, because I do know how to ask questions to get the answers that I want to get. I have done this a little bit for a little while on, you know, in various forms. But what I was trying to say is I didn't do it because I didn't think it was appropriate to do it here. I would rather pull her to the side and not have it on the record.
But to address some...
I'm sorry, Daryl. I think that
Sorry.
Richard had his hand up first.
It seems to me that the report is half transportation and half housing. And yet in the letter that goes to each of the cities, only the transportation person is being asked to come here. I think we're only, and from my experience, limited experience here, most of the questions are on the other side, or on the housing side. And the transportation people are obviously not prepared adequately on that. Perhaps the invitation should be a little broader.
And Diane and I can possibly, you know, suggest to them that they bring people from their housing, or at least get a refresher on what's going on in their local housing. We do let them know that there will be questions about housing, because we picked up on that. But you're right, it would be helpful to have someone whose expertise is housing for the local cities.
So to address some of your questions, she did actually try to answer them by pointing out the Moraga specific plan, which has in the plan, there's going to be development of offices and other retail areas, which would address your additional job opportunities, as well as the housing in that area.
Well, no, it didn't address. I mean, I can derive that if anything is built, it automatically creates a job, but it didn't address it. you know, and especially when you say, and I don't want to get into a debate about it, but if you talk about affordable housing, you know, whatever the median income is, it wouldn't be affordable housing if people didn't need help, if people didn't need to be subsidized in some way. So, I mean, that's my point, and maybe that's not getting through, and maybe that's the, you know, Housing Authority Commissioner in me, maybe that's the social service part of me, not the executive part. So, you know, again, if it's on a forum and you're sitting on a forum, we don't represent us. We represent people. So the questions that we should ask are the questions that should be if we were in the place of the people that we're representing. And those are the questions that I want to ask. And those are the questions that I will ask if I'm part of this committee. And again, like I said, I've learned a great deal, not by asking my questions. A lot of it is by sitting back and just listening to you guys ask questions. But those are things that concern me. So I ask those questions. And if you recall last year, when the city of Antioch came here, and they didn't have answers to what they were doing about affordable housing, about employment opportunities, and they do have people, and I'm quite familiar with the median income, and they didn't have those answers, and they never got back to us with the answers to the questions that we asked, although being in the city, I did get a chance to talk to them. So, I mean, it's not picking on the other cities. It's a legitimate concern for me, just my life's work. So.
And it's important for us to state that. So thank you. Richard?
Yeah, last year there were more presentations on housing than there were on transportation, by a big margin. If you want to deal with this as a joint thing, then I suggest that what we do with the authority is have them bring a transportation person and a housing person to the meeting for the presentation if questions come up. Because too often it's one or the other is here and the other says, I'll get back to you on their side of the house. And with the workloads that they all have now, that's not an easy thing to do. So maybe we want to get both sides of it, but when the gentleman used to sit where you sit and the lady that sat next to him, their primary focus for every one of those meetings was housing.
Well, this whole group, I mean, this Measure K and Measure J is based on all of these things being intricately linked. So you can't just go after one or the other, and it has to be a joint thing. So, yeah, it relates to jobs being provided. So when you say you're building workforce housing, well, how are they going to, who's going to employ them? Those are leading questions. So it goes down all the different roads, and it does equate to transportation infrastructure, no matter how you cut it.
Matthew.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to point out one other thing. You know, if you are able to get through the checklist, you know, ahead of the meeting, you can definitely submit questions to Diane, and she will send them on to the city staff person so that they're aware that there may be some questions that may not be typical questions, or even if it's typical and you want to give them a heads up so they can be prepared. We will always take questions, just submit them directly to Diane, and we'll get them to the city staff person.
Okay. So next on the agenda is future or past agenda items. Do we have any? And so this meeting is adjourned to July 27th. Thank you.